Right, so it's 2 minutes past, so I think we'll get started, and I'll try and sort of play whack-a-mole with people joining after. So my name is Dan, and this is Patrick, and we are going to do a talk about an analogy that we developed together to help us explain and articulate ourselves about a few aspects of change delivery that we wanted to explain to some stakeholders. So for all the people just joining now, the call is being recorded. So if you'd like to, then it comes off, go ahead and do that. So, like I said, my name's Dan. I'm a principal consultant business analyst at Herd. And Herd, we're a BA and product and change and delivery consultancy. So before I joined Herd, I worked for about 9 years at one of the really big, really old English universities, and I got to see lots of really interesting challenges in that space. And since I joined Herd, I've been able to work a bit more in HE at some other organisations, but also I've had the opportunity to work in government, in the public sector. And it's interesting to see how, whilst those two sectors are quite different, there's a lot of shared challenges amongst them, especially in the change delivery space.
Hi everyone, my name is Patrick Coffin. I am a business architect, currently working for a UK government arm's length body. My history is in various sectors, mainly financial services. I've worked for one of the big banks for many years. I also worked for a regional building society here in Cardiff, where I live. I guess I'm pretty passionate and pretty focused on making things simpler if I can for people. I feel like it's a really important part of the role as a business architect, and I think Dan probably would agree from a business analyst perspective, to make things simple for people to understand. And what we want to talk to you about today is just one of those things that we've tried to do to explain a complex topic in a relatively simple way. I'm really looking forward to talking to you about it.
Great, thank you. So let's start off by talking about what we hope you guys can take away from this call.
Thanks, Dan. So this talk is ostensibly about an analogy that Dan and I came up with, as Dan has alluded to communicate change. A topic that, well, for us at least, has always been quite a complex one. It's got a lot of arms, legs, ears, other body parts, and so forth. And what we're going to do with you is share that analogy and the model that we've used, because we thought it might be helpful for you. And we thought maybe the learnings that we took along the way from developing the model might also be helpful for you. So you might walk away from this and go, I'm going to take this model, I'm going to use it immediately in my day-to-day. If you are, excellent. If you don't do that, that's also cool, but we'd love if you took away the idea of maybe using a similar approach to developing your own models and your own thoughts. Doesn't have to be about change, can be about anything. It proves useful in helping us convince and influence a bunch of people and to help them understand the system within which a lot of our roles function. Mm-hmm. More than just being about the model, though, it's about a story about how building ideas together, bit by bit, collaboratively, can be really helpful. And hey, maybe the old saying goes and is right, maybe the treasure was the friends we made along the way as well. So it's been a very bad. Go on.
I need to stop because that's outrageous. But also ostensibly, like you said, ostensibly it's about the model. For me, the secret reason I wanted to do this talk is because I love analogy and metaphor as a communication model. So later on, after we've explained the analogy, I'll sort of share some thoughts about that, and hopefully we can have a bit of discussion and some questions and answers about that towards the end as well.
Definitely. Thanks, Dan. So what we're hoping to get from the session, useful tool for talking about change delivery end to end, something that can be useful or adapted for your stakeholders, and time to reflect on how you develop ideas, how you collaborate, and how you communicate with those stakeholders. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Great. So let's set the scene then for the model that we're going to share. So at the moment, I'm working as a lead BA on a transformation program at a client, and the client is what's sometimes called an arm's length body of government. So I think there are official names for arm's length body. I think it's like a non-executive, non-government organisation. But what arm's length bodies do is they sort of keep the country running. They do loads of cool stuff, quite specialist stuff, and this one's no different. So there's lots of sort of frontline infrastructure-related activity. And actually, one of the things that it does is it treats water. And I think that it's probably quite clear. I realised as I sat down to put these slides together that might have subliminally influenced us in coming up with this model and this analogy. But anyway, to set the scene, so I was new to this organisation, and I was doing what I think anyone new to an organisation would want to do to sort of get themselves up to speed and start sort of working effectively. So I was trying to find out how the place worked. So By that specifically, I mean in change delivery. So who prioritizes things? How are they prioritized? How are they sequenced? What's the mechanism? What's the governance involved? And Patrick was already working at this client as well. So Patrick and I befriended each other very quickly, which I think is super important, by the way, for anyone working on a new client or starting any new job, is sort of finding people that you can sort of talk to about this sort of thing. And we were helping me sort of learn the ropes and understand the structure and the mechanism and how this all worked. And we started talking about how change delivery in this organization was really similar to how we'd seen it done elsewhere in some ways and different in other ways. And we were sort of picking those differences apart. There are lots of things at this organization, sort of feedback that can be taken and measures that can be taken to help with prioritization and with decisions about sequencing that isn't present in other organizations I've worked in, but there are also sort of gaps in the way that they did things. And specifically, we started talking about capability when it comes to change delivery. And that's because in the context that we were working, the organization was just about to start a really big, sort of chunky change program. And we were wondering amongst ourselves in this sort of side chat that we were having about whether the organization knew exactly what capability it would need to get that program done, because it was something that they hadn't done before, a really big change of a technical type, but also how the organization could know what capability it would need. So one of the reasons why me and Patrick get on really well is that we both speak analogy as a second language. So we just happen to, when we're talking to each other, we'll often slip into like simile and metaphor. And actually Patrick started to talk about how change delivery is like water, like flowing through a pipeline. And you can have all of the resources you need. You can have the number of people that you need. That might be the capacity of the pipeline. But if you haven't got the capability, the skills and the experience to get the thing delivered, that's like pressure in the pipeline. The water just doesn't move. And that was where this all started. So we sort of went from there and riffed on there, and we ended up using this analogy as a way to articulate to ourselves, to each other, what we wanted to say about change delivery. But then we ended up being able to take it away and use it to talk about change delivery to different stakeholders. So that's what we want to share with you today. So Patrick, I'll throw over to you to describe the very first part.
Cool, thanks Dan, nice one. So so let's start building the pipeline. So here's a pipe. That's pretty much the whole presentation.
Yeah.
Any questions? No. So like, and again, I think what you will appreciate during this presentation is the really high sort of regard for graphic design that we've adopted in the development of this presentation. But the pipeline is any organization's vehicle for change delivery, right? That's what the whole basis of this metaphor is based around. It's moving from idea on the left-hand side all the way through to implementation at the other end of the pipe. So change in this context can mean all sorts of things. All of these things come in different sizes, different shapes. The list that we've got on here is just examples. It's not an exhaustive list, but there's plenty of different types of change that come into that left-hand side of the pipeline. And I'm sure you'll be familiar with many, if not all of these. So yes, some simple, some complex. So things like strategic projects, so projects as part of a broader strategy, that's the things that are really important for the future of the organisation. I'm sure we've all seen them, stuff that gets the organisation closer to its vision and its mission, the really sort of big go forward projects. They don't always have to be big mind, they could be any size. The next one is like legislative or like regulatory change or mandatory change, some people call it. Now, these may not always be the most fun or eye-catching, they can be. But they are incredibly important, and without these types of changes, organizations can't do what they need to do. So these are sort of the price to play, as some people call them. There's other types of changes coming into the pipe on the left-hand side. Operational improvement, so continuous improvement, small change, that sort of thing. There's always lots of stuff to go after in this space. Some places have more of this than others. Some places are more mature in terms of their practices around identifying this stuff. But you know, anything that needs sort of the impact beyond maybe a very small amount of people or a very small team is almost certainly going to need a place in this pipeline as well. And then lastly, innovation. So any change that's brought about because of innovation, new ways of working, new services offerings, maybe testing new ideas, research and development, that sort of thing. So these are just a number of examples of the type of things, or the type of water, you might say, that find their way into this pipeline. And again, I'm sure you've all got different examples of those sorts of things that you're maybe even working on now. So again, some of it's simple, some of it's more complex, and there's always a lot of it. And that'll be an important point when Dan talks about prioritization in a minute. So there's always a swirling ocean of change above this pipeline, full of it, and no organization can deal with it all. I can hand back to Dan now, who's going to talk about maybe the capacity, which he alluded to earlier.
Yeah, thank you. So now we've got the sort of the super like basic fundamental concept of the pipeline down, we can start to sort of tweak that model and add little bits to it. And that's what we're going to do throughout the talk, and sort of build different parts of it as we introduce different aspects of change delivery. So the first one, and going right back to the very beginning of the talk that we mentioned, is capacity, right? So how broad and how wide that pipeline is, how much water can flow through it all at once, how much change can an organization deliver in parallel. So if an organization has high capacity, so that means they've got lots of resources to be able to do the change that they want to do, then that means they can deliver a high volume of change. They can do lots of stuff in parallel. But if a pipeline is narrow, or probably more realistic, narrow in different places, then that limits the amount of change that can be delivered at any one time. So capacity can be constrained for lots of different reasons. It might be because there are small teams in an organization, so that it might be that for business as usual, the organization doesn't need, for example, to have lots of change managers as part of its organization, but in order to deliver a massive program, it might need more change managers or more change implementation coordinators, for example. Or it might be because the people in the organization don't have any overhead, because they're doing too much BAU work and they haven't got enough time to be able to spend and dedicate to delivering change. So we can measure and understand the capacity of the pipeline by doing things like measuring utilization, or like timesheeting, getting people to whatever mechanism you want to do and whatever tools you're doing to do that, record the hours that they're spending on different tasks and projects. Now, it takes quite a bit of maturity to get to that point, especially when you're starting from zero. But once you get to a point where you really do have a clear idea, quite an accurate idea of what people are spending their time on, what projects, how much of it is change, how much of it is business as usual, then you can start to really understand your pipeline's capacity and your organization's capacity for delivering change. So you can, though, of course, do things to improve capacity, right? So if you have a pipeline that's narrow in certain places, you can focus on those places and you can try and bring in more resource, right? So that might be temporary resource, depending on the program you're trying to deliver. It might be fixed term contracts, or it might be permanent. So bringing in resources is one way of increasing capacity for change. But I mean, I mentioned I've worked in higher education and the public sector. In those sectors, at least, it's a lot more easy to say we'll increase capacity by bringing people in than to actually get the approval and the finances to do it. So I'll acknowledge there are constraints there. But of course, you can't just add people, right? If you add people, that will improve your capacity, but it's not necessarily going to mean that you can deliver the change, because like we said earlier, you don't just need the number of people, you need those people to have the right skills, the right experience, and the right approach to get the change delivered. And so in order to scale delivery, you can't just throw people at it. You do need to think about skills and the experience and the capability.
Excellent. So yeah, let's talk about pressure. These pressure gauges, by the way, took me much longer than they look like they would have taken me. And I wanted to make, because I had to do quite a lot of work to kind of move the dial, otherwise it wouldn't have made sense. So you can see there's different pressure across the pipe. So as we build up, here's where pressure comes in. So this is around it's possible to have high capacity. As Dan's talked about, we can have lots of people, big teams, but also have low capability. So it's possible to have all of that good stuff, but either a lack of experience, a lack of skill or developing skill, a lack of good governance or robust governance or appropriate governance, a lack of good project management, or a lack of even good business analysis. All of those things can affect your level of capability. And the more of you have of those, potentially the higher the capability that you have. It isn't a value judgment. It's just a question of how capable does an organization need it to be in order to deliver the water through its pipe. Pressure requirements vary by organization. So in some cases, the capability will be fine for an organization and what it needs to achieve. In other cases, the flow of water may be effective because the level of capability doesn't match up to the level of water that needs to move through the pipe. So again, high pressure, strong capability, trained teams, good governance, and so forth. Low pressure, slow delivery, or ineffective delivery. So even if the pipe is wide, if the pressure is low, the flow will slow down to a trickle. So even if you've got a really wide pipe with lots of capacity, if you've got lack of capability, the pressure is going to be low and the flow will slow down. Even with large teams, if it's not there, the capability, the delivery of change will be slow and ineffective, which isn't a great spot to be in, particularly things about like the different types of change that we have to deal with. If you have slow delivery when it comes to your strategic projects, you're going to limit your ability as an organization to deliver against your vision. If you have, slow delivery or a slow trickle of water through the pipe when it comes to legislative change, that's going to potentially cause you some serious issues if you don't get those changes done, often within a set of timescales. We can increase pressure, so we can improve capability, we can train teams, we can coach teams, we can encourage knowledge sharing or collaborative working practices, and we can also make sure that the processes are effective. We can uplift governance, we can improve project management, we can embed or uplift those kind of supporting capabilities. As Dan alluded to earlier with capacity, you can also bring capability in. So you can bring in new resources, maybe even temporarily, like contractors or freelance workers to help increase that pressure in the short term. And with good upskilling and good succession planning, you can even use that as a way of bringing that capability up in the longer term as well. So now that we've thought about the width of the pipe and the pressure needed to move things through that pipe, let's talk about making sure that the right things are moving through the pipe at the right time.
Yeah, thank you. So I think deciding what change to implement and when is really important, right, to change delivery. And so is, of course, deciding what should go first and what should wait, and actually sometimes even deciding what is already in progress needs to slow down to make way for something that's of a higher priority. So in our pipeline, we've added these taps, these big, massive sort of valves right at the top of the pipeline. And the people with their hands on these valves are deciding what water should enter the pipeline from that swirling ocean of change over at the beginning of the pipeline, and like what volume of it should be allowed in and at what pace. Now, in real life, the people that have got their hands on these taps are normally members of groups like oversight boards or portfolio planning groups or steering committees. There are lots of different names for them, but most organizations that mature in delivering change will have these boards that have a holistic view of the organization's priorities, and also its capability and its capacity. They need to know, and they need to be kept informed what's out there in that ocean, what needs to be let in. They also need to understand when to open and when to close that valve. So they're there with their hands on that tap, and they've got one eye on the pressure gauge that Patrick just spoken about, that they know the capability of the organization. They know through things like utilization measurement and time sheeting that I mentioned earlier, the capacity the organization has to deliver the change that might be let into the pipeline. And that's how they decide whether to open that tap, that valve, or whether to close it. Now, if the tap is fully open and the entire ocean of change comes rushing in, like we said right at the very beginning, the pipeline is not going to be able to deal with it. It's going to block, it's going to jam, it's going to burst. But conversely, if that valve is fully shut, if you just imagine that for a moment, and no change is coming in, then the whole pipeline runs dry. And all of that capacity that we spoke about earlier is wasted. And all of that capability is wasted because it's not pushing any water through. No change is being delivered. The organization isn't realizing the benefits of the change that it could be delivering. And it's also, like Patrick said earlier, opening itself up to the risk of like legislative compliance or potentially losing market share if it's not keeping up with its competitors with operational improvements, and it might even result in unhappy and unsatisfied customers or students or citizens, depending on the type of service that's being delivered. So the key is to use all of the information about capability and capacity and about the type of change that's out there in the ocean to decide what the priority should be, to make sure that these valves are sort of perfectly balanced and controlled. We know that prioritization isn't just about choosing what needs to come in next. I did mention earlier that every now and then you do need to, with that holistic view, be able to make the difficult decision that a piece of change that is already in flight, that might already be much further down the pipeline, needs to have the pressure taken off it, because that pressure, that capacity needs to be redirected to another higher priority piece of work. So we've spoken quite a bit now about the machinery and the mechanisms of the pipeline, with these taps and these gauges and the pipe itself. So let's turn to talk a bit more about the actual content of the pipeline, the water inside it, and the nature of the change that's being delivered.
Great. So I know what you're thinking, Patrick. Why are you and Dan BAs when you should be producing these type of diagrams for a living? Right? I know, but hear me out. We'll put our PowerPoint skills to side for one moment, because I want to talk to you about water hardness or softness, but I think it's technically called the water hardness factor. Remember earlier we talked about that not all change is equal, some is simple, some is complex. So we can think of this aspect of change as the hardness of the water that flows through a pipeline. So I assume that this element of the analogy resonates more with people who have a lot of hair and live in a hard water area. I did actually ask Jeeves this earlier, but apparently western parts of Leeds have soft water, eastern parts have harder water. I don't know how many of you live in Leeds, but there you go. So easy change is what is similar to soft water. So simple projects flow smoothly and more easily through the pipeline. So soft water in this case, nice. Not any lime scale, not got any blockages, anything like that. Very easy, much easier at least to move through that pipeline. Lovely, lovely soft water. Difficult change is more similar to hard water. So those really complex projects, they don't necessarily have to be bigger, but certainly more complex. They can clog the system. They can slow everything within the pipeline down. So this hard water can leave things like residue. So we talk about things like limescale buildup. But in the instance of change, it's difficulty in going through that process, complexity, lots of arms and legs, lots of things moving about, which limits the width of the pipe and the capacity of implementing other change in the future. So even the easy stuff. So if we have lots of complexity, lots of hard water, leaving lots of bits and pieces everywhere, it can make even soft water projects more difficult to get through the pipe. And at worst, if you've got a lot of hard water, a lot of buildup, like with too much pressure, it can lead to delivery, and it can block the delivery of the flow of the water. So there's different ways that we can deal with this sort of hard water problem. We can recognise complexity and adapt our approach and our governance to kind of adapt to that. Our project timescales, our funding and resource plans to account for the fact that it's likely to take more bandwidth and more pressure and more time to move more complex change through the pipeline. So there is ways of adapting to this. We shouldn't avoid hard water. In fact, it's probably impossible to avoid hard water, but it is something that we can look at moderating. We'll also likely need to be on hand to deal with the challenges along the way as well. And in order to talk about that bit, I'm going to hand back to Dan.
Yeah, so thank you. So I think if it's possible for us to adapt and change the pipeline and make cases to increase capacity or capability, because we know there's a piece of hard water coming in, that's great. But how do we know when there's a piece of hard water coming into the pipeline? And so I'm a BA, so I'm biased, but I think this is where business analysis is most visible in this end-to-end pipeline model. And that's right at the very beginning, where we can test the water before it even enters the pipeline. We can test the water and see whether it's hard water or soft water, so that the people with their hands on those valves can make a really informed decision about when to let water in, and also what needs to change about the pipeline, depending on whether or not that water is hard or soft. So what I mean by testing the water is really some really fundamental BA techniques right at the very beginning, right at the point where a change is identified and a proposal starts to be brought together. And one technique that's like super fundamental, you find it in any BA textbook, is CARDI. So constraints, understanding like what constraints we have in delivering a particular piece of change, the assumptions, like challenging and documenting our assumptions, and then researching our assumptions about a piece of work and how long it might take us, or what capability, what teams we might need to deliver it. The risks involved, really sort of analysing and digging into those risks, making sure that we agree on the impact and the priority of those risks and how we're going to mitigate them. So what might the costs of those mitigations be? Are we able to mitigate the risk? If not, do we need to treat it as like a really serious risk? Does that change how we're going to implement this particular piece of change? And of course, there's dependencies. So what needs to be in place before we can successfully deliver this change? And then also, what is dependent on this change being delivered? And then, of course, there's making sure that there's proper management and identification of issues that might be coming on. So that's the CARDI sort of mnemonic that's often used for this kind of analysis right at the very beginning. And I think, of course, there's lots of other ways of doing that, but this, I think, is where business analysts really, in a really mature model, will really be getting stuck in to make sure that the rest of the pipeline is running smoothly and that the people with their hands on those taps at the top know exactly what's coming in to the pipeline. So you can also, at this very beginning of the pipeline, as well as test the water, there is kind of the potential to treat the water. And by that, I mean, you can imagine in areas where there's really hard water, you might treat that water to make it softer. What I mean by that in a real life example might be that there might be a proposal to roll out a new system in a big bang style all at once across an entire organization. The organization might be really big, and the rollout of a system in a big bang like that might require much more capacity and capability to deliver than a slower phased rollout might. And again, by understanding the assumptions and understanding the drivers behind a particular piece of change, we can help as BAs, the organization, to arrive at decisions or consider options to, for example, look at which departments in the organization are desperate for that change now, which departments really need it in order to sort of meet their goals and deliver, and perhaps focus on them as a sort of a pilot group or a first wave of the rollout. That's an example of how treatment of water coming into the pipeline can happen. So you can take something that's very hard, complex water and make it softer and easier to deliver. So that's the water sort of rushing through the pipeline now, and it has to come out somewhere. So let's jump over to the other end of the pipeline when the change is being delivered into the business.
Cool. So yes, change absorption. So let's talk about, as Dan says, what happens all the way at the other end of the pipe as the change is being implemented and the absorption of that change. So this is being shown as a reservoir, which is obvious from the picture, I'm sure you'll agree. But we did toy with, like, could it be a sponge in the battle of like sponge versus reservoir one. But also because it is quite hard to draw a sponge in PowerPoint. So yeah, probably more sensible to have a reservoir. That's probably not the main content of this slide though, so I'll move on. There's a big old tank, the reservoir, that the pipeline empties into is just as important as the pipeline itself. So, and again, I'm sure we've all got experience of this, but it's the organization's capacity to absorb the changes that are being delivered. And we all know that reservoirs aren't bottomless. There is a certain level of amount that an organization can absorb within its reservoir for change. Some people, individuals, or sometimes areas of businesses or businesses as a whole, just don't have the ability to deal with and understand more change. Isn't there like a phrase, a change is as good as a rest? isn't always strictly true when it comes to things like that. They might already be dealing with multiple change programs that have turned their lives upside down, their work lives, or they might be dealing with lots of different factors. We might be at a particularly peak moment in an organization's annual cycle where actually additional change just can't be absorbed. Anyone that's worked in finance around the end of the tax year will attest to that. So they might be experiencing no change, but still have time for it because of the day-to-day work is so demanding, as I say. So if that happens and the reservoir is too small, it doesn't matter how effective the rest of the pipe was. It doesn't matter how the width of the pipe is optimized. It doesn't matter if we've got the pressure just right. It doesn't matter if we've done a load of treatment up the front to kind of change the shape of the water, change the hardness of the water. It doesn't. Those things are irrelevant. The change will just rush out and overflow. It won't be embedded. It will cause confusion. It'll overwhelm people, and it will just make life harder for everyone as a result. So water on the ground, at the end, if we've put too much change into that reservoir, too much water into that reservoir, looks like things like not realizing benefits, wasting money. I mean, you could call it attrition. I think when we talk about attrition, what we should be talking about is the well-being of people. So it can really negatively impact people's well-being. And any of us that have been involved in a significant change that has been more than we could handle will attest to that. It can really not make people not feel very good at work. So super, super, super important. So we can have the most optimized pipeline in all of Pipetown. But if the reservoir is properly managed or isn't properly managed, then the whole thing is for naught. And that's where our old friend change management comes in.
Yeah, thanks. So we've put change management right at the end of this model, but before any change managers try and flip their desks and rage quit the call, we do know that change management is super important. I think BAs and change managers are natural allies anyway, but we know that change management flows all the way through this entire story, just like business analysis does, just like delivery management does. Workflow and sort of workforce management does. But this particular part of change management, right at the end here, is about making sure that the change is absorbed and can be delivered. So we can do that in a few different ways, right? So one of them is by making sure that the reservoir doesn't overflow, and change managers can do that, and we can help change managers do that by keeping a close eye on how much water is in that reservoir and how much space there is left, right? Keeping an eye on the business's absorptive capacity for change. So change managers do that by essentially keeping in touch with the business. There are lots of different ways of doing it through different channels, but you can imagine regular surveys, you can imagine having regular meetings and group discussions about change and how it's being absorbed. Or there could be a network of change champions or change implementation coordinators sort of on the ground, relaying sort of real life stories and real evidence back to change managers. And that is, of course, another type of feedback that can be fed through to the people that are up there on top of the pipeline with their hands on the taps. If a change manager has evidence and is getting feedback that a particular part of the business is going through 3 massive parallel change programs at the same time that's really impacting their BAU work, the change managers can relay that information to the prioritization board, and they can say, please, do you need to make that change happen now? Is there no way of delaying it or sequencing it, or maybe even sort of prolonging the amount of time people have to absorb them? Another way that change management can work here in the pipeline is as a kind of filter right at the very end of the pipeline to make sure that the water that's coming out is clear and ready for people to consume and drink. Just like if you sort of screw off the end of your kitchen tap, you'll see there's a little filter there. Please don't do that. Or if you do, don't blame me if you can't get back on. But we need change managers can do that, can make sure that the water coming out of the pipe is like crystal clear and as easy to consume as possible, by making sure that the messaging is super clear, that people understand sort of well in advance as well why the change is happening, what the change is, and what it means for them. So how will it affect them directly? I think that makes people sort of more open to change, and it also makes change easier for them to absorb. And one particular thing that I want to call out here is where BAs and change managers can work together right at the very end, is that if you're understanding and designing and documenting a to-be state, so how things are going to be once the change is delivered, a change impact assessment is really crucial to that. So if BAs are creating to-be maps, for example, of the processes and the procedures that are going to be in place, that can really help if you catalogue the roles that are impacted by the different changes. That gives change managers and comms managers a brilliant sort of insight into exactly which group of people are being impacted by what change and the degree to which that change is going to change their lives. And of course, that information is like gold dust to a change manager, because that helps them, first of all, it gives them a clear picture of what the change is, but it also helps them tailor communications to specific groups of people so that they're getting the information that's most important to them. And it also, of course, can help inform training and and the shaping and the tailoring of training and the delivery of that training to the different groups that are being impacted. So right at the very end there is where we have put change management, but again, I will reiterate before any change managers come for me, I realise change management is right the way through the entire model. So that's it. That's the pipeline model that we wanted to talk through. Patrick, over to you to close off the brilliant drawing there.
Yeah. It really comes to life at the end, doesn't it? So that is the pipeline, Dan and Patrick's pipe, if you will. It started off so simple. We all can cast our minds back to that just simple bit of pipe, but it looks pretty complex by this side of the deck. That's because I'm sure we all know real life delivering change is complex. It is end to end. It is connected. It's an interdependent system. It's useful to think of it as a whole. And as we've talked about throughout, fixing one area or acting on one part of the pipe, like how wide it is or how much pressure there is, or a particular part or a particular element of the flow of the water through, won't guarantee that change will flow through it smoothly and successfully. As I was thinking about it, I think it's a bit like society as a whole. We need to understand the interconnected nature of our lives and seek to improve things as a whole. If we want truly like sustainable and beneficial change and a better future, we need to focus on all elements of the system, not just one, and hoping that'll do it. I was thinking, like, what is change if not about making things better in the future than they are today? There's a African-American philosopher called Audre Lorde, said that there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives, and that is absolutely true of how we deliver change.
Yeah, really well said, thank you. I think here's the pipeline in its sort of GCSE textbook glory. For anyone that might want to take a cheeky screenshot of it, like we said, we really want people to like, feel free to use this, to use parts of it, take it away and tweak it. This has been recorded anyway, so if anyone wants any of these slides, we're happy to share them.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, take the PowerPoints, adapt it to what you need to.
Great, cool. What we did want to do, and this is the bit that I want to get to, right, which is our sort of reflections and thoughts about or really what we've done here, and we'd also like to leave some room for sort of any questions or any contribution as well after we've done this. So the first sort of theme of reflection is about collaboration. So me and Patrick built this together. Patrick started the idea, and from the very beginning it was a sort of co-created thing. That's just cool for like lots of different reasons. You get to be sort of more creative than you might be if you're on your own. You get to have like influence of other people's ideas, and you end up with a sort of a broader canvas on which to work. The really big lesson for me here, though, I guess, is a bit deep, but is that if I find myself working on something for any sort of length of time, like of more than about half an hour, I start to sort of subconsciously feel ownership of it. And I feel like lots of people end up putting up these sort of subconscious barriers around that work that makes it less easy to listen to the ideas of other people and to take feedback, right? We can all try and become sort of more mature and sort of more open-minded as people. But if you imagine you work on something, like if Patrick had built this on his own, or I built it on my own, and then brought it to the other person, and then the other person started to tweak it, you just feel a bit more defensive. So for me, one of the reflections was building this together meant I had none of those feelings at all. I didn't feel personal ownership of this. I just felt like our thing, and actually not just our thing, but open to anyone that we shared it with.
Yeah, definitely. I'll just add to a couple of those. So I think so it's also building on Dan's point, like it takes quite a lot to be vulnerable as well. So like if you've made something, and even if you share it quite early, it might be something that you're really interested or really passionate in, or something that really resonates with you, and actually being vulnerable and recognizing that feedback from someone that you respect or who respects you is only going to make the things that you do better, and maybe make you a better person as well. And I think it's important to think about, when you are sharing and you're collaborating early, do think about who you are sharing this stuff with as well. If you're going to go and put yourself in a position where it's someone who you've got, your arch nemesis, and you're like, let's build this thing together. I respect you. Maybe that's going to work. But also when you are building stuff like this, don't be afraid, if this is your first sort of step into this sort of thing, to do it with a really friendly audience and to build out, take those steps one at a time. And also recognize, when people do give you feedback, it's only ever information. you know. And you also sometimes, if you don't get feedback that you want, or you may be feeling a little bit like that wasn't particularly fair, just remember it's not always about you. And the other thing I'd say is, in this space, is we all bring assumptions in, and we all think of things in ways that we, I guess, resonate with us. And having someone else say like, "Hey, nobody wants to see a sponge on here," or, you know, that doesn't make any sense, or what is water hardness, and why is there limescale in my kettle, is a great way of testing these things. We all bring in these versions of the world in our head, and until we say them out loud and work with someone from it, we can't really interrogate them properly. So I really advocate this point that Dan was making about collaboration.
I knew you hadn't got over the sponge thing. I can't believe you're bringing it up now. Terrible. So the next point here is that I just love analogy and metaphor and simile. Anyone that knows me knows that. Patrick has as well. This slide is the title of a book that my friends bought me when I left the university that I worked at, and that's kind of because I was I'd say infamous probably for not being able to stop myself from speaking in analogy. So I am enthusiastic about it. So I wanted to just say a couple of points about why I am so enthusiastic about analogy. So I think, first of all, it can make it easier to articulate what you want to say about a complex subject, and it can help it easier for people to understand the thing that you're trying to explain. But I also think analogies become influencing tools because they're sort of stories that people can sort of carry along with them. And it's easier to tell a story than it is to start quoting some sort of textbook definition of what, you know, prioritization or anything is, right? It's a conversation starter, and it means that people go off and they carry the idea with them without you needing to be there. They'll go off and talk about it in other meetings, and it will take a life of its own. It's also a sort of a strange way of enabling people to talk about difficult concepts. I think by framing capability, let's say, as water moving through a pipeline, it makes it easier for teams to sit and have a conversation about whether they've got the capability, the skills and experience they need to get something delivered. It's much easier to say, have we got enough pressure to move this water through, than it is to say, have we got a capability gap in our team? If that starts the conversation, then great. And I think the last point I want to make just about why I think it's so good is that I really do think that analogy is like a second language, and most of us speak it. And if anyone here speaks a second language, they'll sort of know the feeling that you get when you're sort of trying to explain something to someone, and you search in your mind for the words, and the words come, the perfect words come, but they're not in the language that you're speaking at the moment, and so you can't use them, and that's really frustrating, and you're constrained by that. But almost everyone does speak analogy, so if you do find the words in an analogy, why not use it? Why not use that as a particular tool to help yourself express what you want to say?
Totally. Just a couple of points to chip in. I can also see there's a bunch of comments that are coming as well. Super great input. We'll pick those up towards the end as well. Maybe do a bit of summary of something. But yeah, love a lot of the stuff that's coming in. I think just on metaphors generally, like I love it when you sort of you think of one either collaboratively or own, and then you talk about it, and then a few days later you hear that someone else has said it to someone else, and you're like, it's caught. Because that's what you want, isn't it? You don't want to keep all this stuff to yourself, as I'm sure many of us don't. We want to see our ideas and other people's ideas flourish. So I love the idea that metaphors can be used in a way that, as Dan says, allows people to communicate on their own and build on. I do think there is a risk with metaphors sometimes as well, and I think that we've danced very close to this risk with this metaphor in some ways. And the reason that we've built this up slowly, as Dan's going to talk about in a second, is to make it consumable. But do you ever do that thing, like, I don't really do it anymore, but like when I was a kid, I'd be like drawing a picture or colouring in, I'd be like, this is sick, this is, I've done it, I've nailed this, and I keep doing it, and I've done too much, and suddenly it's a mess. So there is an art to stopping when you've done enough, but there's certainly where they are a bit more complex, I think it's important to build those metaphors in layers, because if we just come to this talk with you and just said, bang, here's a pipe with all the stuff on, might have been a bit difficult to chow down on, as Dan's going to talk about.
Exactly. I think what I do want to acknowledge, though, and to sort of give space to talk about this, that I like metaphor and analogy, and lots of other people do, but other people don't. It's not something everyone engages with, and it's like a personality thing. It might be a psychological thing. Some people don't like them. Some people find them like inaccessible. They find them trivial, facetious. Why are you talking about pipes and waters when we're supposed to be talking about, change delivery? Why are you doing this? Some people don't speak analogy, and that's not a value judgment. It's just a fact. They just don't like it, and it can also confuse things, right? if you're talking about something that's already simple, don't complicate it by trying to make people analogize it. Don't talk about something that is more complex than it needs to be.
Sure. Don't talk about only metaphors, because as Anya, Dan's partner, would sure attest to, that's all Dan talks about.
It's true, unfortunately. So, but I mean, having said that, here's one last one for it.
Yeah.
That everyone likes tapas. No, I know not everyone likes tapas. I like tapas a lot. What I mean by that, like, is that tapas is lots of small plates, delicious bite-sized morsels. I'm getting hungry just talking about it. Luckily, it's almost lunchtime. This analogy is like tapas because it's modular. It's made up of lots of little plates, lots of little bits, and that means that we can break it up. It means it's easy to digest in little chunks. And I think any sort of good analogy for explaining things to people has that quality and has that characteristic. So imagine, like Patrick said, if we just smashed that GCSE textbook picture right up at the very beginning and just started to try and talk through it, I think it would have been much more difficult and take much more effort from us to sort of articulate in a way that made sense what we were trying to say, and it would have been more difficult for you as listeners to sit and try and listen to it. So the final picture is complex and like busy looking. That's okay, because change delivery is busy and complex, and there's a lot to talk about it, but it's the gradual build up that makes it useful. And I think the other thing about tapas is there's always room for more. Again, for me, especially if it's something sweet. That's the same with this analogy. So bearing in mind the health warning that Patrick just put in about overcomplicating it, I think that when we have shown this to people and talked it through, and we hope to get some ideas from you as well today, people have always got like an extra little thing to add on, like, oh, that's cool, you could add this on the end. Or maybe if you didn't want to focus on, I don't know, the hardness of the water, and you wanted to talk about something else, you could sort of bolt on another idea and another aspect of the analogy. And that's also fascinating, because when people do that, they join us in the co-ownership of this as an idea. It makes them feel bought into the idea. It encourages them to go away and share it with other people.
Totally. And there's actually a couple of bits of the chat. I'm just going to call out a couple of them
Yeah,
now.
go for it,
Yeah. So there's one from Olivia Carwell. Thanks, Olivia. So I thought, if the pressure is high, i.e. lots of capability, but the pipe is narrow, low capacity, does the pipe burst? I wonder if this model demonstrates. This is a great point. You lose pressure, so skilled resources, there's not enough room for it. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, steam just like bursting out the side, or just gas. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, great. And that's exactly what I want to talk about next, actually, just to sort of close this off before we open up to your thoughts. Is here's some real life examples of how people have sort of bolted things on. So we'll talk to people about this. They'll be like, I really like it. Have you thought about adding this to it? It won't surprise you that a change manager said that's not enough change management. We need to be more clear at the end. And you could, for example, add like a really sort of like finely engineered system of taps at the end to sort of distribute the exact, milligram of water, a milliliter, the communication, sort of pouring exactly the right manageable amount of change information into that reservoir to ensure it never overflows. Or, and again, just like Olivia just mentioned, you could think about leaks in the pipeline. Now, this isn't exactly what you just mentioned, but what another stakeholder said to us, well, you could talk about, that all that time that people are doing that's not being captured in their timesheets or their utilization, like meetings running over or having to spend extra time because tooling is too slow. You could show that as leaks, taking away that their capability and their capacity to be able to deliver change. And then the final one is my sort of personal favorite, which is you could have a goldfish just like swimming around in there to represent that pet project that has somehow made its way into the pipeline without anyone really understanding why and how it got in there, but they all sort of have to deal with it and figure out how to get it out the other way.
I'm sure those are incredibly rare.
Oh, yeah, completely. Yeah. I'm sure none of us have ever come across that before. Yeah.
I'm sure none of us are dealing with them at the moment, actually.
Yeah. So those are some. Those are just some real life examples. So we'll stop there, but there is 10 minutes left, which is great to hear your thoughts, your questions for anyone that's happy to sort of jump on mic, put your hands up to talk. I'd love especially to hear any sort of extra ideas you guys might have had to bolt on.
also, if you don't feel comfortable talking, that's totally fine. You can always pop it in the chat and we can read them out while people are having a think. That's one from Mark. I don't know, Mark, if you do want to come in and talk about this, but you talked about how organisations can have many pints and they sometimes have to meet others or be diverted. And I think that's talked about from another comment as well, actually, about the fact that actually you're managing multiple pints. Chris, you said the same, when you've got multiple pipes and multiple flows of water that are all interdependent, so you have to stop the flow of water, especially when you're not controlling the flow, but responsible for the quality of water at the end. Very, very, very true, particularly in changing products. Really good.
That's the other thing as well, right, is that there's lots of stuff that's not in that model. User research doesn't appear anywhere in that model, for example. Like that user research is there, like, where are we? Right, like that just wasn't the thing that we needed to articulate when we were building this model, but it could easily be, which is why we wanted to share this. Strip out what you need. I think you need to keep the pipe, you need to keep the water, and I think the capacity and the pressure is probably a good idea to keep in there. If there's anyone in the audience sat there with a sort of degree in hydro engineering, thinking this whole thing doesn't make any sense, and you're probably right. Like, I don't know if this makes plumbing sense, if you see what I mean. I think those are the fundamental parts of the model.
Marina's also made a very good point, which scaled, agile, or safe makes this tricky. I would argue that safe makes everything tricky, but I do take your point. Yeah, and again, it's a great point, because actually, I think we've probably almost implicitly thought of this maybe in the environment which we're working, which is more waterfall, which is more sort of nice end-to-end process. So there's definitely some refinement here to reflect maybe scaled, agile for sure.
Yeah, nice one. Yeah, no, I mean the tapas really, this turned into a tapas metaphor at the end as well, Jason. But no hose pipeline. I haven't thought about that yet, although I can imagine, pre-election period and the suspension of a lot of change might be the equivalent of a hose pipeline or a drought. You never know. That's live, terrible riffing. So, does anyone have any questions that they want to? Yes, change freeze the hose pipeline. That's a good shout. Anyone, any questions or any comments they wanted to ask? Other than in the chat, go ahead and put your hand up. But otherwise, we can sort of monitor the chat, see if there's any other points.
Oh, hello, Chris raised his hand. How do you
Chris? We can't hear you, Chris, mate, if you're talking. I'm sure that was going to be good, I know. But Chris is gone. Try again, Chris, if you get a chance. Can't accept the deck, yeah. Great, thanks very much, Mark. Okay, thanks, Chris.
No worries. There was one, but I'll go back to one that Mark has made as well. We were talking about different perspectives. So like the solutions we work on, sometimes it's an approach you haven't thought of. I love this point. Pushback isn't necessarily a bad thing. It could be boring. Yeah, it would be boring if everyone just agreed first time. So what's the first step on being good to something is being bad at something. So yeah, I agree with that statement for sure. And also thank you, Liam, for pointing out that I've got that particular metaphor backwards, which opens up a conversation about malaphors, which we're not going to get into now. Don't know what that is. Do feel free to ask Jeeves, because it's great.
Yeah, definitely. I think while we're sort of waiting for any more questions, I think when I imagined what use people might get from this session, I did hope that people would take away, some of their own reflections about times they've used metaphor as a way of communicating, and I did hope that they'd sort of reflect maybe a bit about what we said about, being open to collaboration early on. But I think a lot of people do find it interesting to be able to sort of take this as a model away and maybe discuss it with some of their own teams. Gwen, go ahead, please.
I just wanted to say, loved the metaphor. Absolutely adore a good metaphor. More of an observation rather than a question is, in my experience, I actually think having a metaphor creates common language, especially around something that can be complex or an area that people haven't been in, or when you get in a group of people together that don't necessarily normally work together. If you can all get together around a metaphor, it gives you that sort of commonality and it brings you together. So more of an observation, but I've already had a look at the metaphor book and I will be ordering it. So thank you very much.
I recommend it. It's great, actually. I think you'll really like it, Gwen, if you like the knowledge.
Yeah, there's also one called the Oxymoronica, which I think I'll add to my basket as well.
Nice.
Okay, I'll check that one out as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
No worries. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Chris,
I was just going to quickly say on that. I think it's such a great point, because you break down those preconceptions, you break down those barriers. Everyone's on a level playing field. You haven't got any of sort of the baggage that comes to that if you're talking in like, well, it's finance or it's HR or whatever. Such a good point. Sorry, Chris.
Hello, is it working now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful, the power of technology. So apologies that I missed the start of the presentation, but in the way you're describing it, does business analysis or change management deal with the quality of the water? I've mentioned that already. That's what I'm responsible for, because where you've got that free flowing nature of it, and you've got the pressure from behind that it needs to keep moving. Have you got junctures where you're reviewing, or someone is reviewing, that the quality of what you're doing is still being maintained? And I don't mean necessarily against risks or issues or constraints, but more about, is what we're doing, we're still heading in the right direction? Because if it's only going to go one way with the waterfall methodology. So how are you balancing that quality angle?
I like that, right? So I think in the sort of ecosystem that we've created, in the vocabulary, in that common language that Gwen spoke about, I think that the water, it's not the quality of the water itself, but it's more like the pace at which it moves through the pipeline, as in, like, is it being delivered to the correct standards, and is it moving as it needs to, in line with program plans, project plans, and budget? And that's not something in that we've got in the diagram. We haven't got program or project management represented as part of the metaphor in the diagram we built. That's because for our purposes, it wasn't something that we needed to articulate, because we're in the context we were working in, that was already present, and it wasn't something that necessarily needed illuminating. It's a really good shot, Patrick. Have you got any thoughts on that?
No, nothing to add to that really, mate. I think it's a really good response.
Yeah, it's a good response. Chris, have you got any ideas about how you'd show it?
No, and I suppose I'm responsible for the quality internally, with the company that I work for. Whereas obviously you guys are working with a lot of different stakeholders, so and work with multiple organisations. So I suppose there has to be a level of responsibility on the folk you work with to they have to take responsibility for ensuring it is going to do what they need it to do at the end. So it's an interesting balancing act. In the roles you're in. So yeah, for me, because that's my role. I'm not, not that I'm not interested in time constraints or the bigger picture or anything else, but I always come back to performance without quality isn't performance at all. Like ultimately, you can deliver 100 pieces of work really quickly, but if they're all rubbish, it doesn't really it's not worth it. So I'm always about, it's got to be quality. Otherwise, there isn't a lot of point in doing it. And that transfers into managing people as well. Ultimately, you can have the best all singing, all dancing solution on earth, but if no one uses it or wants to engage with it, it's redundant. So that's where I come at it from.
Thanks, Chris. I was sort of toying with the other day. I was toying with, so one of the biggest issues with water quality in the country at the moment is the level of like sewage in our waterways. Anyone that's been swimming anytime recently will attest to that, and it's obviously a massive problem for the country. But I wonder whether the poor quality could be represented by effluent that is in the pipe.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. Well, I think we've got time, and a few people are dropping off, so I'm happy to sort of wrap up this particular point, and it will be on the recording for anyone that's sort of hanging on, looking at their lunch or their next meeting. But I just wanted to say that thank you very much, everyone, for coming along. Anyone that might be dropping off now, but Patrick, back over to you to finish off.
That's pretty much it. I don't think we should end on a conversation about sewage, mine. So we probably want to just shift past that.
Well, I think I'm going to take the challenge, though, Chris. I like the idea.
Yeah.
In my mind, I've got little windows that are being opened and checked, for assurance to make sure that. But it's interesting to think about how do you do the quality of the work. It could be that is just a limitation of this. I'm not advertising this as like an absolute panacea as a way of describing change delivery, but it's a really great, really interesting show actually.
Cool.
Thanks, Olivia. Thank you. Thanks everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Cool. Cheerio all. Thanks for your time.
Bye.
Take it easy.